Well, good day and welcome to another Carnage House production. With me today is the infamous, the notorious Barclay McGain. Barclay, how are you going?
Yeah, not too bad, Alex. How are you, mate?
Terrific as always. Now, one of the things we like to do on this channel is give people a fair crack when no one else will. If anyone types in Barclay into Google and then even the first two letters of his last name, my guest tonight will be basically the top hit on Google search, and the top articles will be from The Guardian. So you can kind of guess what type of search results you're going to be getting. But for the purposes of this interview, we try and give both sides a fair go. Barclay, you came kind of into notoriety as part of your role as am I correct, the president of the young LNP on the Gold Coast?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Correct. So you went to schoolies with the vice president, and then decided you were going to do a couple of vox pops, a couple of interviews with the people on schoolies, seeing that it is your local area and you're trying to get in touch with the people there. And then do you want to tell us kind of what happened and why you've got such a reputation?
So essentially I was elected as the chair of the Gold Coast Young LNP in October of 2019 it would have been, and I was 19 at the time. We were one of the youngest executives in the history of the LNP in Queensland. So as any young, I guess, politically engaged person would, they tried to change the whole thing. So we had a really good plan for how we were going to boost our engagement with our membership. We had about 100 members, but the issue really was engagement, getting people out to campaign, getting people out to social events where they're able to spend money and meet and canvass with local politicians and whatnot. So that was really our target in my executive. And we decided as one of our engagement things that we would go out to schoolies and interview a number of schoolies and just basically see what their political views were on a number of topics. And, being within a political party, we understood that, this was something that was a bit out of the new. It's something that people hadn't really done before. So we decided we'd essentially draft a few key questions that we'd ask people that wouldn't necessarily be divisive within the Liberal Party. So we didn't ask people what their views were on abortion because, again, the Liberal Party's divided on that. Same with things like same-sex marriage and drug legalization, for example. So we asked questions that we thought were, pretty unanimous amongst Liberal Party members, being, what are your thoughts on Scott Morrison, thoughts on freedom of speech, thoughts on the Australian national flag and national anthem, and essentially what were your thoughts on air conditioning all classrooms in Queensland, which was one of the big policies of the LNP at that time, and it still is, going up to this year's state election. And we went around and we interviewed people, and all of them were organic. None of them were pre-planned. Everyone that we met was, genuine. I just met them on the street and said, hey, would you like to ask, answer a few questions? And the first week we had was for Queensland Schoolies Week, and then the following week was for Interstate Schoolies Week. So we essentially went about our business. There was at least 4 or 5, I guess, camera crews going around as they do a lot of the schoolies videos and whatnot. Obviously, we were one of the only ones of a political nature, though. And yeah, we were just going around asking people these questions. As you can imagine, a lot of the responses were, incoherent and slurred. But we had some really good responses as well. We had some really good dialogue with people. And a number of the people that we happened to bump into that night, given that I had graduated just the year earlier, were people that I knew. So within this video that we compiled in about November of 2019, there would have been about 5 or 6 people that I knew in the video, and they all made the final cut, because the fact that we met them organically meant to me that I didn't think it excluded them from being as in the video itself. One of them was a guy, Jake Scott, who happens to also have, volunteered up in Petrie with Luke Howarth, who's an MP up here in Queensland. And essentially, the question that I asked him, as I asked everyone, was, what were your thoughts on the Australian national flag and national anthem? And he said something along the lines of, basically, we've got to stop celebrating any culture that couldn't invent the wheel, for God's sakes.
Well, there's not too much to say about it. I'm fed up with having all these sports stars stand out on our stages and not sing the national anthem. They're putting our Australian jumper on. They're going to sing the anthem. I mean, we've got to stop celebrating a culture that couldn't even invent the bloody wheel, for God's sake. We've got to start enjoying and living in Western culture.
In reference to the Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, so in reference to Indigenous Australians, and he obviously prefaced it by saying that he was discontent with people not standing for the Australian national flag and national anthem. That's how it related to my question, I suppose. And yeah, he kind of voiced that view, I suppose, and obviously I smirked at the time. And look, myself and Jake are close friends, and there's photos to show that, so it's something that's I'm fully open about that. And the thing is, it blew up because, as we know in Australia, this the issue of talking about Indigenous Australians, even if you want to have a frank discussion with someone, it's very hot topic, and it's very easy to go astray and somehow blow something out of proportion as to what it was. Because and then to me, I guess the reason why I was subsequently brought into it, despite it not being my comment, was because as president of the Gold Coast Young LNP, I guess it was my prerogative as to what kind of clips we included in the final video, because it wasn't Facebook Live, it was pre-recorded, and we chose what to publish and what not. And when we published the clip, I kind of ran it by a few people. I would have run it by 20 to 30 young LNP members, one of which was Nelson Savan, who was the young LNP president at the time. He's the only person entitled to authorize content on behalf of the young LNP. He's a former advisor to Deb Freckington as well. And essentially what we decided to do was at least run it by him, make sure it had all the checks and balances. And when he gave it the thumbs up, we decided to post it. And shortly after that, there was, I guess, kind of, an avalanche that ensued, particularly from the media, all stemming in relation to Jake's comment regarding Indigenous Australians.
Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely it definitely caught some attention, and it caught widespread, particularly on kind of left-wing media. They were very, very quick to suggest that both the person who said it and you, by association, were racist. Do you think that the comments in and of themselves are racist?
Yeah, so this is something that I've pondered myself. My thoughts were: are they insensitive? Yes. Are they a bit unkind? Yes. But if we're using that term racist, I completely reject that solely because I ask people. I say, what race does he discuss in his statement? If you actually look at it specifically, it's clear that he's referencing Indigenous culture. But my question that I say to people is, if someone said, "Oh, Western culture sucks," no one says, "Oh, that's racist against white people." I mean, no one would ever say that. I mean, I hear people saying Western culture sucks on the daily around, and no one bats an eyelid. But all of a sudden,
I think the distinction would be that Western is kind of a conglomerate of races, and that Indigenous Australians would be easily identified racially.
Yeah, well, look, again, that's the inference that people are making. But when you're looking at the comment literally, in my view, I would call it a culturalist perspective, as in he's showing that one culture is somehow better than another. But I would also contest that, well, I mean, cultures have been better than others since the dawn of time. I mean, the Aztecs and Incas committed cannibalism. I mean, we've still got, modern cultures within the Middle East which practice genital mutilation. So there's cultures that are better than others. Look, that was his opinion. Was yet again insensitive, unkind. But I don't think that the notion that it's racist particularly holds up. But again, that's my view, and it's subject to other people's interpretation.
No, sure. I don't believe in kind of this cultural relativism whereby everything is kind of equal. All cultures offer equal things. Like, it's pretty clear that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans offered far more to our standard of living today than kind of the Aztecs or the Incas. But I think the problem is, and I am a total champion of freedom of speech, and I am a total believer that you should be able to say whatever you want. My problem is when it comes to a situation where it not necessarily detracts from the actual punch and the actual meaning behind it, but it obstructs an actual meaningful conversation that you can actually have. And like, by the way, if he was saying it in a joking manner, I think you should be able to joke about whatever you want. But if he is leveling a genuine criticism, then what it does is, by extension, will kind of discredit any serious objections brought from, let's just say, the Liberal Party towards the way in which we actually construct policy around Indigenous Australians. And so my question to you is, you're viewing the content. I mean, obviously you see that you're laughing, and to be fair, like, I don't know, there's a good chance I would have laughed at that. I may have, I don't know.
Yep.
But I mean, when you're making a conscious decision of whether or not you would put it in, if you were to go back and do it again, would you?
Yeah, it's something I've grappled with, and I've unanimously, again with the benefit of hindsight, without question, I would have left it out. So yeah, it's not saying that I've wronged. I've wronged in the sense that I didn't intend to bring the party into disrepute. I didn't intend to bring my family into disrepute either. And had I been able to see what would have unfolded, I certainly would have left it out, just because it would have saved people a lot of grief. It would have saved myself, a lot of defamatory articles being written about me. But having said that, now that we can't go back in time, I'm looking at the comments, and instead of just, wallowing and saying, okay, well, this is such a shame, why did I do that? And, thinking about it for the rest of my life, I'm actually thinking to myself, well, hang on, this really, really reflects how, such a small thing can blow up just to enormous proportions and play out in front of the entire Australian media circuit, over a guy's comment at schoolies who was 17 at the time. It really indicates to me, one, that it was clearly a slow news day or a slow news week, because it played out over the course of a week. And it also indicates to me that, wow, we really have this toxicity over discussing the issue of Indigenous Australians and of Indigenous culture. Because I make the illusion that if someone had said Western culture sucks or another culture sucks, I know you pointed out the correct point before, that it's more of a conglomerate of different cultures, but I still contest that we should be able to have a frank discussion about why we see nearly 25% of Indigenous people making up our prison population, when they only make up 3.3% of our actual nation's population. And I've seen you've interviewed Jacinta Price. I think she speaks the truth on this matter, really. I think, in her position as a, counsellor in Alice Springs, I think she's doing tremendous things. And it's the ability to call a spade a spade. And with political correctness nowadays, it's almost preventing us from calling out the facts that actually need to be called out, because when you've got a problem, the first step to solving that problem is realizing you've got that problem. And sadly, we haven't even got to realizing we've got a problem. Instead, we're playing this blame game whereby we blame institutions, we blame the positions of power and whatnot, for all the suffering that's caused within Indigenous communities today. Now, it's not to discredit the generational trauma that Indigenous people have faced. I mean, we've had systemic abuse of Indigenous people since the dawn of time, really. But I like to think, and many people like to think, including many of my Aboriginal friends, that we're in 2020 now, and we live in genuinely an egalitarian Australia, whereby everyone has equality of opportunity, and wherever that's not allowed, the government does what it can to make up for that. So I honestly think, continuously alleging this whole idea of systemic racism is entirely the reason why we see, mass Indigenous incarceration. I don't think it holds up entirely.
Yeah, look, I agree with a lot of that, but it's, someone might say, well, Barclay, I understand you want to have an honest and frank conversation, but your contribution to the conversation thus far has been posting a video where a guy says, what have Indigenous Australians kind of brought to the cultural table? I agree with all of those points. Like, I think and I agree that it has been blown out of proportion. Mm-hmm. But I would also say that if you wish to have a frank and honest conversation, then kind of the way to go about it, I think anyone should be able to say what they want. Like, I don't really believe in etiquette or decorum, but at the same time, if we are going to say, for example, if we understand that the LNP is supposed to be the ones who are kind of advancing a factual agenda based on historical data, and one of the avenues through which they post something is like a 17-year-old kid saying that the Indigenous Australians don't bring anything to the table. Like, his criticism may, in some respect, in a more nuanced way, have some value, but I think it's difficult on the one hand to ask for Indigenous Australians to stop talking, or for us to kind of relinquish the claim of systemic racism, which, by the way, I don't believe in, whilst also having that kind of stuff on the other side. So all I would say is that it kind of cuts both ways in that sense. And I guess, obviously he's 17. Like, I don't really wish to drag that guy over the coals for it. I reckon there's been plenty of stuff that I've said. It could even be way worse than that when I was 17. So I think definitely, like, if you look at the way, for example, he was treated and potentially you were treated compared to, like, say, Greta Thunberg, I would say that there's definitely some disparities in the media coverage. But in terms of the actual content of the argument, like, I largely agree with you, and I think you're basically on the money with a lot of the factual content of what you're saying. But in terms of, I guess it's a learning process.
Yeah, and if I can just I guess top off that, as I said, like, if I had my time again, I wouldn't have published the content. But I guess we're at this point now, and my issue was that this wasn't some pre-planned, thing whereby, he was going to say this and we were going to point out the issue of, Indigenous people consistently blaming systemic racism for the issues within the community. It wasn't planned, but now that it's the case, and I don't want that to be my sole contribution to the matter, whereby I was just interviewing a guy who said that. So I've written a couple articles which basically summarize my viewpoint, and in many hopes, I hope it clarifies my viewpoint, because I'm not someone who just, again, a lot of people will put the label out there, white supremacist, neo-Nazi. It's just anything anything but that. And that's why I've tried to, I guess, write some articles, not necessarily to, I'm not claiming to have the silver bullet that's going to solve the issues, because, I mean, that's going to take, a lot of action, particularly from people within those areas. But at least to clarify my own position. And, I guess that, with this, I suppose, newfound platform that I almost have, that hopefully people can read that and at least understand my perception and hopefully, at least reason with it. And see that, it isn't some white supremacists versus Indigenous Australians. It's people who actually want to, bring everyone together. Because, when I say stuff like there's they're somewhat like six or seven times more likely to be incarcerated in our prisons, I'm not saying that as like a haha gotcha. I'm saying it with a genuine sorry heart, because it's not a good thing and we don't want to continue seeing it. And yeah, I think there's plenty of solutions, and I think all should be on the table. And right now, I think we're stymieing a lot of the solutions that we just don't want to hear because they're uncomfortable truths. And yeah, hopefully, through the use of, yourself, myself, and a lot of other people who are willing to, come out and be a little bit politically incorrect at the expense of, saying the truth, I think we're the people that, could hopefully start that conversation.
Sure, 100%, 100%, and I agree with that. And for the record, like, if I have a choice between leaving someone's content online versus taking it off, I always say leave it online. I think even if it is blatantly racist, or even if it is sexist, homophobic, trans, whatever, I think people in general are smart enough to make up their own minds, and then kind of you can just let the rest simmer out. And I'm sure as well, like, I don't know if he regrets saying that particular thing. Like, obviously you got him at schoolies. I mean, at schoolies, I know what I was like trying to get me to say something coherent would have been a stretch at best. But I don't wish to drag him over the coals. But I think, like, if you do talk about it, whether or not that type of comment builds a constructive dialogue, I would probably err on the side. I would err on the side of not.
Yeah, definitely. But I guess my issue with it isn't that, the comment should have all of a sudden be kind. Like, it's in no world is that comment kind. In no world does that comment somehow just, average day-to-day speak. It's clearly a bit of a jab. It's clearly insensitive. But the fact that we just, have this hugely disproportionate, media cycle, and I mean, the issue was, I think, #1 trending in Australia for at least 3 days, and it even registered on international charts on Twitter. The thing is, it came under my name, which I was very confused about. It wasn't like young LNP schoolies; it was all Barclay McGain. McGain. And I guess it doesn't help having a name like Barclay McGain, as opposed to Tim Brown.
Yeah, I did see that HuffPost, when they did the write-up of the article, mentioned and posted a couple of tweets from a guy who I think's Twitter handle was like Gideon Rosner's OnlyFans account, who said that you've got, this is HuffPost, by the way, who said award for dumbest name goes to Barclay McGain, as if somehow that substantiates any argument that HuffPost has made.
Well, I'm gonna be honest. Like I'm not on Twitter, but a lot of mates were sending me stuff from Twitter, and half of it was about my name, and half of it was the fact that I was white. Half of the fact of it was that I was, straight male, and half of the fact was it that again, like just things like the way I dress, where I live, things like that, and it was just like, again, they just cannot help but play this whole idea of identity politics, I think. And really, judging people by, the way they look or their education or whatnot. And it's awfully bizarre, something I'd never experienced. And Gideon faces the same thing. Gideon's a friend of mine, and with a name like Gideon Rosner, he's probably in the same boat as me. And he's got a accurate caricature of himself, with his voice and the way he combs his hair. But he's a really good guy, and again, he kind of just blurs it all out. I'm sure he has more haters than most people in Australia. But he's doing an incredible job there at the IPA. Yeah.
Well, I always appreciate people who do put their neck out there and say the risky stuff, like way more than, it's far harder to do that, but it's also much higher value to do that than it is to sit on the sidelines from Twitter behind an anonymous account and hurl abuse at someone. And then obviously the people putting those articles together, which quotes those tweets as some kind of substantial evidence, I would say, I wouldn't want to be a person whose brain operates that way. That must be some kind of perpetual grievance machine inside their skull. But I want to move, before I move on, I would say that I think 100% guilt by association, I don't abide by. I think the only thing that, if any of it, you should be criticised for would be whether or not you choose to omit or keep it in the video. I would say probably you did actually do the right thing in terms of keeping it in the video. But whether or not, it's because the problem is after that, it's really not up to you what happens after that, because it isn't really your personal account. So people can distance themselves from you and the content in kind of a cowardly manner if they choose to. And that's basically exactly what happened as far as I can tell. Do you want to then go through potentially what happened after the video in terms of your role as your role in the LNP?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess within 2 days, I suppose the knee-jerk reaction from the LNP headquarters here in Brisbane was to suspend myself, the vice president, and the schoolie who made the comment, who happened to be an LNP member, all three of us at once. So we were 17, 19, and 21 at the time. And they decided to suspend all of us indefinitely, essentially pending a further investigation that the party would undertake. And I guess in the months that followed, if we focus specifically on this issue, being December, it was quite an uncomfortable time. So in January, we have a mechanism whereby you get reviewed to the disputes committee of the LNP, whereby they investigate the matter further. They say, okay, so how did this video arise? Was this a planned response? Who did you get approval from prior to doing this? And then after that, they make a recommendation to the state executive, which incorporates, the opposition leader, so the state party leader, literally in all of Queensland, the people who literally own the brand of the LNP, and all the people who work within the party administration at headquarters. And I had my disputes committee meeting in January with a lot of people with a group of people within the LNP who basically asked me about the issue, and I reasoned with them by giving them, I suppose, the list of people who'd approved the video.
Yeah.
And sadly, we didn't hear any further things from that. Even though people within the highest position holder within the Young LNP had approved this video, there wasn't any shared accountability, any shared responsibility at all. It was all essentially heaped on these 17, 19, and 21-year-old kids. And to me, that was the kind of thing that really stuck with me. And, in the months that followed, even from that disputes committee meeting, I'm always, waiting, because I was someone who had volunteered thousands of hours of work for the LNP. I worked on the federal election at headquarters, so I knew a lot of the people there. And I'd worked for a number of, people within the LNP. And I was kind of, really playing the long game, really saying, okay, look, I'm not sure I agree with being suspended for something I never said. It was just a video that I included and it was approved. But I'm going to play the long game here. I'm going to wait it out. I'm hopefully going to go through the processes and I'll be allowed back into the Liberal National Party. But unfortunately, that never came. I mean, in February, I think the excuse was, we've got a lot of matters that are at hand, a lot of, internal matters to deal with, and they had to interview more people. In March, we had the council election. In April, there was, more matters to deal with. And then May, it was more about, there's this issue of coronavirus, so we can't meet now. And then in June, it essentially got to the point where I'd been working for federal MP Andrew Lemming for a sustained period of 6 months. And I guess the left-wing media had kind of been conjuring up, taking things from all different places in the 6 months after the schoolies video, because I guess maybe my fatal flaw is I never shut up. The entire time I find it impossible to shut up. I'm unable to not voice my view on a topic. I don't go out there looking to be provocative. I don't go out there looking for controversy, but I'll at least speak my piece. And if I think that there's something that is filling a void and maybe the Australian public's perception has got it wrong or something like that, I'm going to voice it on social media, and as I think everyone's right should be. And little did I know that the Guardian had been compiling this list of little things that I'd done, and even though in isolation, people would honestly laugh at the thought that, one, you could write an article about that, and two, somehow someone would lose their job over that. But when you compile it in a list that big, it makes it just seem like a mountain out of a molehill. And essentially, I was brought in by the LNP at less than 24 hours notice, and they essentially gave me an ultimatum to resign or be expelled. And
resign as.
So I'd already, relinquished my position as Gold Coast president when I was suspended 2 days after. But my membership was, indefinitely suspended. So it meant I couldn't, attend party functions and whatnot, which didn't really mean much of an obstacle because we had coronavirus, obviously. But when it came to June and when it came to that meeting, they knew that the story was going to break tomorrow because they'd been asked for comment. Andrew Lemming had been asked for comment about this article that was going to drop in the Guardian and at least 2 or 3 other newspapers. And we're essentially told that you can either resign or be expelled, for which I chose the former. I guess this is the scenario now, whereby I've essentially been expelled from the LNP. This is where we are now. And I was also fired from my role as a electorate officer working with Andrew Lemming in Bowman, which was quite frustrating, I guess, from a financial perspective, but also people find fulfillment from getting a job. So now I guess I'm just focusing on university. I'm still interested politically. I still kind on open forums like Facebook and with other think tanks and whatnot that we've got here in Queensland. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the chapter on my involvement with the party, and I guess it's closed for now, I think.
Okay, well, on reflection, what would you say you've learnt about the Liberal Party in your dealings with them from the moment that you kind of submitted the video to the moment where you were suspended?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and obviously, I think the answer to that is not necessarily anger. It's not hatred. It's more so just disappointment. I think we're the party of individual responsibility and standing up for the underdog and not always being the politically correct type. You see a lot of our promotional material that a lot of our MPs distribute. It's heavily against this, political correctness. It's heavily in support of taking personal responsibility. And my feeling was that the LNP had failed to practice that, and that they'd thrown a 17, 19 and 21-year-old 3 lads under the bus, and that they were acting on a matter of protecting the party's brand as opposed to acting on principle. And I think it's a really, really slippery slope to get into because we're giving the media what they want. I think, some of the most successful politicians, I guess, whether in the United States or in Australia, are people who, when they make a mistake, they reflect on their actions. And if they still stand by it, they openly say that. Because I think, if you stand on principle and you at least voice your open and honest views, I don't think you can go wrong. Obviously, if it's something you regret, you apologize and move on. But if it's something that the LNP have approved, they could at least say that, like that there was no vouching for, these people have committed so many hours of hard work to the party, or there wasn't any vouching for, these guys are young university students, kids make mistakes. No, it was, they're no longer in the party. We've suspended them indefinitely. The party action will follow. And I felt as though that wasn't really vouching for, any loyalty or any service that I'd given to the Liberal Party at all. And I think, it's a common thing, particularly within, modern politics. It's not exclusive to the LNP, whereby, young people are often being trodden on by those in, higher party positions. And, for many years, I wondered why, on the young LNP platforms out, Facebook pages and whatnot, we just morphed into this trap of, oh, Deb Frecklington made a good post, let's share it. Scott Morrison made a good post, let's share it. It's kind of like, really? Is that what we're here to do? Is that how we're going to bring in new members, just by sharing stuff? And that's why, our membership is slowly dying. I mean, in Queensland here, our average membership age is above 70. So we've really got this issue whereby we're not appealing to young people. And I can't help but think that, whether it be, an accumulation of our policies, but I think largely the reason why we're not resonating with young people is because the party's just there to wash their hands with them, and they come out to campaign and then they don't stand by them when they're in a bit of a pickle. And the media now just thrive off that because they know they're going to get a reaction. It's like, if you're in the schoolyard getting bullied by someone, possibly the worst thing you could do is fight back or try and call them a name. The best thing you could do is just to ignore it or just ignore the media hype. And I honestly think the LNP here at Queensland could really, at least try that. I think that would be really responsible, or at least acting on principle as opposed to PR. Because there's nothing stopping the Guardian tomorrow from writing a defamatory article about you, Alexander, but it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. Because as we know, media outlets can include ridiculous Twitter handles from like the Gideon Rosner example that you used, and they can write an article about almost anything. So, for example, it may get to the point where someone puts on social media, lower taxes are good, and all of a sudden the media hyperbole turns that into, oh, he hates poor people, and all of a sudden the party look at that and they say, well, we have to suspend this person because they're only acting in the interests of PR and protecting the party branding as opposed to principle. And to me, that was, again, using that word, disappointing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously you've touched on a couple of things there. The first thing I would say is I don't know if referencing the age being the 17, 19 and 21-year-old is probably the strongest argument, not that you are making an argument. I think at that age, basically, you are a man and you should be responsible for your own decisions. But I think more broadly speaking, you're right. And I think that this is a trap that both parties have fallen into, especially the Liberal Party, who is supposed to be arguably more libertarian and individually principled. I think obviously it's very, very, it's easy to paint with a broad brush here and kind of the real, they've obviously kind of left you by the wayside, as far as I can tell. I mean, there was obviously a chain of accountability that went all the way through from you guys up until it was posted. There's a number of checks and balances which are ensured that nothing gets posted on the official account without prior authorization by a number of people. There has to be some actual individual people who must be responsible for that, who have been kind of obfuscating their responsibilities to come forward. You don't have to name them, but I would say, should people in the who are members of the Queensland Liberal Party be concerned that the party and party operatives are clearly not engaging and practicing principles, but rather kind of pursuing a reactionary media-based kind of policy agenda?
Yeah, so I think the proof is in the pudding there because, the LNP, I think Deb Frecklington and a lot of LNP figures openly came out in the media saying, the comments are racist. They don't represent the views of the party. Anyone involved has been promptly suspended and will face, the party processes. But if they really wanted to, really root out, quote unquote, racism within the party, they would, at least look at taking action against the highest person who approved that video, being Nelson Savan, who's the young LNP president still now, was a former policy advisor to Deb Frecklington, and is the only person entitled to authorise statements on behalf of the young LNP. And
so what's happened to Nelson? Has anything happened to Nelson?
So the interesting thing is, all that's happened to him is he's been rewarded another year in the top job by default due to coronavirus. So,
Right.
It's not a reward, but it's certainly not action, to discipline him.
Yeah.
My name's in the media, Patrick's name's in the media, Jake's name's in the media. Those are the three people involved. Nelson's Nelson's name is not in the media.
Yeah.
And as much as we are the young LNP, I'm 20 years old, and he's nearly 30. So there's a huge maturity gap here. When he was in university, I was in primary school. So there's a huge gap in maturity here, and I'm not seeing much individual responsibility from a leader like himself. And the thing is, I wouldn't openly be saying that, this is a huge miscarriage of justice had I received just one call, one text, one how you going, or one let's catch up for a beer from Nelson or any of the young LNP executive, but I haven't heard one thing since, because there's this culture of careerism within the young LNP that I think is developing. And when I say careerism, it's basically just people who will, again, disassociate themselves from anyone who's even remotely, outspoken or remotely a little bit controversial, in pursuit of that next job at Goldman Sachs, that next job involved at a local bank, or that next job as a staffer, or for pre-selection in a safe seat. And I think that's one of the great pitfalls of modern politics, particularly youth politics, that many of the people who join it aren't necessarily people who want to actually, go and change their community for the better. They're pawns who will basically play PR warrior for the rest of their life, and try and just align themselves with the right people, and literally climb the social ladder until they get to pre-selection in a safe seat. And I really think that kind of pattern that we've fallen into is really bad, because it means that when people are down, when people are, hurt, when people are getting their names splashed all over the Australian media circuit, we can't even message them and say, hey, how you going?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I agree with you on that. But what the question then follows in, let's just take that as given. What are some actual practical things, or some actual kind of legislative changes, or rule alterations or amendments, or things that we can actually do to ensure that this type of stuff doesn't happen again in the future, and that the actual interests of the party members are looked after? Because if you have an average age of 70, you are clearly missing the boat in some regard.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we need to allow for more fiat power for a lot of young people within the young LNP. It's a tricky question, and if I knew it, I'd certainly be, definitely broadcasting it more. But it's more of a cultural change that we need to have, a cultural change whereby, a young person stuffs up, which a lot of young people do, including myself. One thing that I really want to make clear to everyone that's watching is, I'm not exempt from responsibility for my own actions. As I said up from the outset, I have wronged. I approved the video. I featured in the video. I at the end of the day posted it. So I'm clearly not free of liability here. But what I will say from a party perspective, I think in order to succeed in the long run, we need to actually look at matters as a matter of principle and know what fights to stand up with. Extremism, neo-Nazism, it's important to call that out. Anything like white nationalism, white supremacism, it's disgusting behavior, and it can't be allowed to continue in the LNP. But when you've got, passionate and committed members with the best of intent to do a promotional video which would boost enrollment within the Gold Coast Young LNP, I really think that there's a clear, bright line between, some people who are clearly extremists and people who are just trying to do their best and may have slipped up. I think they've got to pick and choose their battles, but right now I think they're playing this draconian approach of anything that could end up on page 5 of the Courier Mail. They just want it nothing to do with. And I think in the long run, it's going to damage them politically.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that kind of there is definitely truth to the idea that particularly the young LNP is an R.M. Williams brigade, full of guys who are kind of on the take, on the up, who are looking for a way in which they can kind of gain connections and further their career rather than actually believing in the principles of the party. My question to you then, we're a small YouTube channel. Our views often kick off from people making direct call outs. I mean, if you are going to say that there are certain individuals who need either to resign, be sacked, or just lift their performance in the party, who would you say?
Yeah, so I think, starting from the top, I think Nelson Savan, I really think he ought to consider resigning solely because I think he's really failed in his duty of care to members that are actually far younger than him, in many cases more than 10 years younger than him, that are both, involved within the young LNP. And, to neglect to message people or at least say, hey, mate, hope you're doing okay, when their face is being splashed around the media. I mean, I had Channel 7 and Channel 9 camped outside my house for 2 days, hoping to get an interview, consistently ringing my doorbell, to the point where I almost felt inclined to call the police. And there was not one message. And all of this he would have been notified by. He would have been notified by the original Schoolies video, which got published. He would have been notified by, again, this is something we haven't touched on, but my friend Wilson had committed suicide at a similar time. One of my good friends, Wilson, had committed suicide due to a similar matter. Then my name had been put through the media again with these, social media posts that they'd brought up. And then my name had also been again in the media when I was fired in my position as a staffer for Andrew Lemming. And what's the sole action that the leader of our movement has taken? Well, he's blocked me on Facebook. That's the extent of it. And to me, it shows a lack of a duty of care, particularly from someone who is in quite a senior role, has held senior positions within the party for quite some time. And the irony was that had I remained in the party and it had gone to the state executive, he would have sat on the executive to vote whether I get to remain in the party over a video that he approved. So he would have been able to decide my fate in the party. And this is all over a video that he approved.
Yeah.
So it's a huge conflict of interest there that I thought he was able to remain in the party. But I also think that from the administrative point of view, there's a number of people within the administrative ranks within the Young LNP that I think really need to either, change their approach or consider resigning and at least taking on a new approach. And I think,
who are they?
I think, the major name is the campaign director, Michael O'Dwyer.
Yeah.
I think the issue is that, he's not allowing people to, I guess, speak their piece or speak out. And he's taking action on a lot of people for really petty matters. And I'm thinking, we've got a state election coming up right now, and we've got this, party division. And I think that played out in the media not too long ago, whereby Deb Frecklington was referencing the backroom boys of the LNP sabotaging her election win, because these people talk behind people's backs and they meddle in these certain things. But
Deb Frecklington also came out and said that you were by association racist. Was that correct?
Yeah, well, look, and the thing that I've also got to point out is that Deb Frecklington, as much as, she's a great lady, I've met and spoke to her a few times, but often politicians, particularly, within this culture of division, or not a culture of division, but this, toxic culture that we've got, particularly leading up to a state election, politicians are saying what they can to distance themselves from people who they don't see in their path to win the election, and anything that's outside of that path, they don't want any part in. So she wasn't commenting on that as that's how I see it, and yeah, that's racist. She was commenting on it, one, from the pressure from the media and from the advisors that come from the party administration and the political advisors that, notify her of what would be the best thing to do politically, all from a political perspective.
Yeah, so I would regard that as kind of an act of cowardice. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are acting like cowards. They're not, again, they're not standing by a lot of their members. And there's been article after article, at least pressuring them for that. I mean, we've got a case where, numerous cases in Queensland whereby someone who wants to, run for a position or gets pre-selected as a candidate for the LNP at a local state seat, being asked about a list of every single sexual partner they've had, being asked about their sexuality.
Really?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's insane. And
what, to ensure that no dirt comes up during a run?
Yep, exactly. They're being asked, have they ever, done drugs? Were they ever photographed if they've ever done drugs? So there's a lot of really personal questions that come out. And the thing is, the vast majority of it we'll never actually hear, because we sign confidentiality agreements within these things. So the brave people who are speaking out of this Star Chamber, whereby you have to sign something, they're only the cases that we're hearing. So there's a very good chance that the most severe cases whereby you're intruding on someone's, personal life,
So
is
sorry. Who is signing these confidentiality agreements?
so people who go in and they want to become a candidate,
Yeah,
or
for
people
pre-selection.
for pre-selection, same as
Yep.
people who go into the disputes committee meeting, as I did.
Yep.
So I signed a confidentiality agreement. And they are at risk of being sued by the Liberal National Party. And there's a lot of ongoing lawsuits right now for people who are speaking out because you go into a meeting, you think, oh yeah, of course I'll sign this. It's just so that we don't say what gets out in the media. But little do they know that they're going to be asked these really, really invasive questions about name every sex partner you've ever had, or what is your sexuality? Have you ever,
So the confidentiality agreement covers what other people say in the meetings, or that you won't divulge what they asked you in the meeting prior to pre-selection or cabinet or whatever.
It's both. So everything. It's basically like that, old Las Vegas motto of whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right.
Whatever happens within LNPHQ stays in LNPHQ.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the confidentiality agreements we're basically forced to sign. I think the only exception you're allowed is a legal figure or a legal advisor or personnel, which I didn't think I needed. Frankly, at the time, whereby
that would seem kind of unnecessary, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it seemed unnecessary.
You would think so?
I mean, it would have cost me, quite a substantial amount as well.
Just so that you could potentially run as a candidate.
Well, yeah.
As a kind of legal counsel for these questions, is that what they were asking?
Well, so no. So again, this is, I guess just, basically reading the letter of the law and what they're saying you're allowed. So, at my disputes committee meeting, I could have had legal counsel, which I didn't think I needed, so I opted against it. And then people who run for pre-selection, I think they're afforded the same opportunity. But again, everyone has to sign the confidentiality agreement, and it stays that way. Are you
aware if that is the case also for people who want to run, say, for the Labor Party or the Greens?
I'm unaware that's the case. A lot of the time it takes people who are dissenters and willing to speak out, and unfortunately, the people who don't speak out and the people who bow down to the party as much as they can are often in some of the highest positions. And they would never speak out for it because it would mean they'd lose their six-figure salary. Whereas that's not the case for me. I'm largely a volunteer for the party, so it was never the case. So yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no idea about that. I mean, obviously, kind of the prevalence of confidentiality agreements for individuals who are entering politics on the presumption that they're working for the public good is obviously concerning. You would think as well that the people there would be working more for more openness rather than not disclosing things. Exactly. And also that if what was being discussed in those meetings, as well as the people who were in those meetings, were kind of genuine content, then there would be no need for confidentiality agreements altogether. I mean, it could be argued that Donald Trump is so successful primarily because he's probably the least confidential person that we've ever seen in US politics. There is basically nothing about him that we don't know. But obviously that hasn't really hit the press as far as I'm concerned. There hasn't been much discussion in the press about the prevalence of confidentiality agreements, or really that kind of top secret nature of meeting and pre-selection. Is that your take on it?
Yeah, so it hasn't, I guess, ballooned in the media as much as it would be, as much as it would actually solidly reflect the invasiveness of the matter. It's been reflected in a lot of left-wing outlets as much. But I think the issue that a lot of media outlets particularly take in terms of publishing them is because they are a breach of the confidentiality agreements, and a lot of people who have broken them have actually found themselves in court. In the status quo. So, I mean, there was an article in The Guardian last week which pointed out, my scenario, but also the scenarios from, a local councillor here in Brisbane, but also, local members here as well, who have, found very, very similar scenarios. Obviously I was never asked about, I believe the process for pre-selection is far more rigorous than what I was subject to. But it was widely reported that I was berated in the meeting, and it's not far from the truth, because these things are quite rigorous. They want to get to the bottom of things, and I really do think it's a little bit invasive, particularly in the instance of those people who are getting pre-selected. And I think there is an issue of potential media bias, because the people at LNP HQ are clearly they've got Courier Mail on speed dial, Sunday Mail on speed dial, a lot of these outlets, and perhaps they're not content with publishing something that defames the LNP itself, particularly in such an intrusive nature that calls out people working at the party administration, particularly 3 months out from an election.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. Who is in charge in particularly in kind of enforce? Is that just a rule, or is that something that isn't spoken of, or in terms of the confidentiality agreements?
Yeah, so it's something that's not spoken of, and if you look at the LNP constitution, it really is. It allows for so much fiat power on the part of the party administration. So nothing is off limits. There's very little in the way of what is members' rights, what is the right of the member who's been held accused, or the rights of the member who's looking to be pre-selected. What rights do they have? It's virtually none. The rights all sit with the people within the administration and the people who have power. And it extends to, I guess, this group of, largely men in their, 50s to 60s, who own the party effectively in Queensland. They're not elected. They're appointed into those positions, I suppose. I guess they just run this star chamber kind of protection racket for a lot of their people that, that they like. And some of the people, whether they don't like, they'll do whatever they can to try and find dirt on them, to try and, get them out of the party, particularly when it threatens their brand and their PR.
Yeah. Would you, corrupt is a tough word and it's a harsh word, but would you describe the upper echelons, particularly of the Queensland Liberal Party, as corrupt?
I don't think corrupt is the right word, solely because whenever I think of the word corrupt, I think of money laundering.
Sure.
That's just the connotation that comes in my head. I think that the thing that I would necessarily call it is dishonest and lacking principle. I think that's definitely the things that comes to mind to me. I would almost say to the point where it's devoid of principle, whereby they don't stand by people based on their actions. They stand by people on their loyalty to the party, or their ability to run for a safe seat, or their ability to get on their knees and beg for forgiveness. I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's the right direction. But I honestly, I'm actually not a believer in karma. But I do think that in the long run, it won't serve the party well.
Well, it's already not serving the party well, would be my thesis. I mean, the fact that that the two-party preferred overall is always so close, when we've had basically the most incompetent opposition in the Labor Party that I think we've ever seen, probably in like the last 15 years at least. And the fact that it's so close would tell you that there's something fundamentally not attractive about either party, but also particularly the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
That would be my take on it.
Yeah, if I can point it out, I think, since the days of Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen in the 80s, I think there's been probably like 30 years since then, whereby there would have been maybe 10 elections. I think we've won 2. And, this is, Queensland is the state that many people say is the most conservative state. And, the state Labor government are doing an awful lot wrong, and an awful lot whereby they could easily lose the election. They're one of the only states that hasn't delivered a budget. We've got we're in debt more than any other state. Our unemployment is higher than any other state. And I think crime figures are relatively the same. And we've got a lot of corruption within people like, Jackie Trad, for example. She's been brought before the Crime and Corruption Commission. And we've got, Anastasia Palaszczuk, who's, caves in on a lot of things and flip-flops on a lot of positions, particularly around the mining industry. But, we haven't been able to cut through. And I think you look at, I think there was internal polling released from the Liberal National Party that was, not supposed to be leaked to the media. and the approval rating, I think it was the preferred premier rating for Deb Frecklington was 19%. 19% compared to Anastasia Palaszczuk. That their number's worse than Bill Shorten. And he was unelectable almost, particularly seeing as he lost the unlosable. And sadly, I think right now the chances of us winning this election, in spite of, I mean, you look at sports, but you look at those, political pundits, they would have the LNP as favourites. But I almost beg to differ. I think the Labor Party probably have a 60% chance at holding on to power compared to the LNP's 40% chance. And if I was to make a prediction, I would say we're heading for a Labor minority government.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, that was actually really interesting. I had no idea about most of that stuff in terms of the internal workings. Do you imagine that obviously it's not ideal for the party to have you on channels like this potentially, not necessarily ratting on them, but giving them a bit of a spray. Have you received any communications from the party saying to you, mate, you better zip it, or there's going to be more coming your way, or anything like that?
No, I haven't. But I've also made the idea of treading carefully with what I say. There's I have to be, for the sake of not being dragged through the courts. And I'm not one to go out and slander the party or say that they're evil, because they're not. They're people there who, at the end of the day, they're just trying to protect the party's image. And they're just doing it without, much care for the members, in my view. And look, at the end of the day, we've got an election coming up in 3 months, as I said, and, I'll be voting. And there's one thing for sure, the LNP will be far higher than the Labor Party on my voting ticket. But, it's...
Who will you be voting for?
It depends. I mean, who the local candidates will be in my area. I think I still will be voting with the LNP as first preference, solid because I know the local member in my area, and I think she's doing a tremendous job representing our area. But that's not necessarily signalling my approval for what's happening with the party on an administrative level. And in my view, they will always be the better alternative. But having said that, there are so many avenues for improvement, and I really would love to see the LNP improve, particularly here in Queensland. I'm unaware how it is in other states, but from what I understand, a lot of people who you discuss this matter with, it really doesn't. It's not to this point of toxicity that we have in Queensland.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I'd be keen to hear about it. If there is a similar type of thing happening in New South Wales, I'm sure there probably is. I don't think that the behaviour at the administrative level in the Queensland Liberal Party would be kind of existing in a vacuum. I'm sure that there are procedures and practices that kind of work across states and work across branches. And you hear things about branch stacking and pre-selection type of stuff all the time. It's not unusual. But it is disappointing at the same time. And I guess it comes back to, you describe yourself, I've heard, I think, as a libertarian, largely. Mm-hmm. Does it kind of ring home to you that doesn't matter who it is in government, there's always going to be kind of mates looking after mates and lining their own pockets?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the way we're trending in Australian politics. And, the 20-year-old me is definitely different from the 16-year-old me, which was all like, the Liberal Party of ruling Australia, it's beautiful. It's definitely hit home that, there are political games played on both sides. As much as, a lot of people go into politics with the best intentions, obviously sometimes they end up getting sucked up into this system whereby they have to, participate in, I guess, political mudslinging, I suppose. And it's unfortunate. I wish there was more people who, were more outspoken. But the sad thing is the people who are most outspoken are on the never to be promoted list within the government, and they'll never get a position as a minister, and they'll never, get a platform to, speak common sense or speak what they genuinely believe, which is a sad thing.
It is. Well, I have to give props to you, Barclay. It would have been very, very easy to go into a hole or into a corner and kind of lie in it. And shut your eyes off. So I have to give you massive props. I think you've weathered the storm quite admirably. I think there is definitely a tendency in the media for the practice of guilt by association. And even though you didn't say any things that were particularly damaging in the video, you still kind of got stung with the consequences. And that's an unfortunate reality of the way kind of the media business works, and particularly personalities, I guess, in the media. It's often who you hang out with is what you get judged on, not really the content of your own character. But that being said, I think if you're working your best for the interest of the people, and you can always recline into your own substance and your own thoughts, at least you've got your own character to fall back on. So I think that's a credit to you, Barclay, to be honest.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, look, I mean, I could probably say the same to yourself, mate. There's a number of people out there who are really, standing up for, I guess, people who've been really trodden on and whatnot. And as much as I mean, even nowadays, I'm still, getting death threats and whatnot. People saying that they're going to come over to my house because, I mean, the media leaked where I live. So I mean, anyone's able to come over if they really wanted to search it up. The media leaked my phone number as well, my email address. So I've been subscribed to seemingly every protest that goes on in Queensland.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Look, obviously, I don't wish for anyone to do it, but it is kind of funny.
Yeah, well, it's funny because
Barclay signed up to the socialist alternative protests running through Brisbane.
Yeah, look, I think it's funny at that point because it's as simple as saying, delete. But when they're rocking up to your house, you get worried about and
sure.
Thankfully, no one has touch wood. But there is that potential out there because there are videos, and I have them on my phone whereby people could easily see that address and come to my house, and if they wanted to, they could launch a threat at me. But one thing that I've tried to do is live out my values that I at least try and preach against a lot of people, like particularly where I speak my piece on Facebook. Like, I don't have Twitter, I don't have Instagram, so I really talk on Facebook, where I canvass a lot of my political opinions. And I've never once deleted a comment. I've never once blocked someone. I've never once spammed someone, and I've never once insulted people on their looks or anything petty like that. All I've simply done is engage with people, and I've left it for people to see. Like, I mean, there'd be at least 100 comments on my most recent post calling me fascist, racist, Nazi, everything under the sun. But all I say to them is just a polite, do you mind substantiating what you're saying? And they can't respond. And I honestly think a lot of people are seeing that. And that, as I was saying before, for every couple death threats I'm getting, there's someone messaging me saying, hey mate, hope you're okay. But they're not just saying hope you're okay, they're saying, oh, and by the way, keep going. And that's something that I know it sounds like it could almost be like a Hollywood movie script, like keep going, keep doing the fight. Like, I'm not claiming to be a noble warrior, I'm not oppressed, I'm not a victim, but I'm just a guy who is studying economics at university, likes to have a say from time to time, and all of a sudden there's meme pages being made about me called McGain, you've done it again, with 9,000 plus members. There's photos of me being taken at the local McDonald's where I go and get a Big Mac.
I saw your brother egged you as well.
So that was a funny scenario. So I guess we had a scenario whereby at home my brother was a 16-year-old, and any 16-year-old loves TikTok. And they're on TikTok, and he decided to egg me, I suppose, and it was quite funny in hindsight. At the time, I was flaring angry.
Not stoked.
And he's not someone who views me as a racist. He's someone who was doing the video as a joke. We're still great mates. We talk every day. And he's probably in Australia, he'd probably be the leader of the Ben Shapiro fan club. To give you
really?
To give you an idea of his political opinions, he's probably.
I went through a Ben Shapiro phase. Yeah,
he's probably even more, I guess, conservative than me. Maybe a little bit libertarian, I suppose. But we're really similar on a lot of politics and whatnot. He listens to a lot of Jordan Peterson as well. So he's
good man. We're big JP fans here on Carnage House. Big JP fans. So that's a good thing.
He's very good. Yeah.
He's a good dude. All right, well, Barclay, I think that might just wrap it. Is there anyone, or you want to give a shout out? Like, I mean, there's obviously been quite a few people who have done, at least from what I can take from your side of the story, who have done pretty rough by you. Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to and say thank you to? Because I think one thing we should practice more as people is saying thank you.
Yeah, no, I think, I'm not sure I relinquished, like, there's a lot of people who'll message me and say, like, oh, you're a minor public figure now, or, you've got this platform or something like that. And I'm not sure I relinquished that at all. I don't think I have one, just yet. But what I would say to people, anyone who's supported me, stood by me as a friend, I really support it because, in my opinion, one of the most saddening things to see when you go through something like that, whereby you're splashed on, newspaper after newspaper and number one trending, for 3 days. The thing that hurts most isn't, some article that's written about me, isn't some news report that's written about me. It's seeing that, a bloke that I played cricket with for 3 years has decided to block me and delete any photos of me on social media. And it's kind of like, wow, it's really shallow. It's pretty awful. And as much as there would have been, 20 to 30 people who've done that, there's far more people who have, thankfully reached out and, support. And they don't, some of them side with me. Some of them say, oh, he didn't say anything, but at least the majority of them are at least saying, look, mate, you made a mistake. But it's clearly blown out of proportion. Let's catch up for a beer next time we're around. So there's people who, aren't too career minded and actually want to stick by people. And, if I can, I guess, make another point, which I don't think we've touched on yet, but, I really think that in terms of going forward, there's a culture that really needs to change because there was a mate of mine, Wilson Gavin, who was a prominent person within the UQ, I guess, student political scene. He sat on the UQ Union Council with me. And he was, I guess, someone who had very traditional Roman Catholic beliefs. So quite opposite to me in terms of he was quite authoritarian. I was more libertarian. And he decided to protest a drag queen story time event whereby, drag queens would come and read to 3 and 4 year olds. And look, my libertarian view would say, like, again, not harming me, go ahead, do it. But his issue was also that it was on a public space. And these drag queens have been publicly funded to do this. So he organized a group of about 20 people whereby they went to the protest and said, drag queens are not for kids. And that was, all of a sudden the videos came out of him online. They were splashed everywhere. And a very similar scenario to what happened to me happened to him in January of this year. And I gave him a call because I was good mates with him. I gave him a call the night of the protest where everything was blowing up. I said, mate, hope you're okay. I hope you're doing well. And he wore it like a champion. He was saying, I'm fine, doing well. I'm having a laugh about it. And I said, good. It's good to see he's in good spirits. I mean, it got to the point where you're familiar with the Veronicas, the singing duo.
Mm.
They were basically saying, tweeting, off their heads, basically saying, oh, he shouldn't exist, this kind of thing. And it was, really, really offensive. And then the next morning he woke up, went to the train station and just literally just walked in front of it. And now we have to, live with a 21-year-old who's committed suicide because of the media hyperbole. And the party themselves had just disassociated themselves from him by suspending his membership, or I think he was almost expelled from the party. So, again, it really shows that these, effects, these things can have really, they can really affect people who've been in an unfortunate position whereby they're subject to the media scrutiny and the media barrage. And thankfully, I've never had mental health issues and never even pondered the thought of that kind. But I worry for the next person who, says something silly online, the next person who, decides to speak up. What if they can't handle it? I've got a lot of friends who've gone through mental health issues who I know for a fact that, if they had a bad tweet written about them, they would be suicidal the next day. And mental health, is something where people are really, really fragile. And I think, people ought to think about that. And as I said, from the person within that perspective, it's not about the media scrutiny. It's often about your close friends that disassociate themselves from you. And that's often what hurts most. So if that can be kind of like the summary piece, I think that's the culture that we need to kind of change. It all stems from, again, cancelled culture, ending the idea of political correctness. And I think that will serve us well. And I think responding to people that, are willing to speak their piece could actually, make for a more lively Australia that's, has and allows for free and open debate. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think it's definitely something that we should take seriously. But thank you, Barclay. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I mean, you are notorious. You are a little bit infamous. But nonetheless, it was really, really good to talk to you. So thank you for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
That's right. Thank you so much, Alex. And I really love what you guys are doing at Carnage House. I've watched a few of your videos, and as someone who loves sport and loves politics, it seems like the channel for me.
Well, thank you. That's probably the best. That's getting clipped up. That's a promo. That is a promo right there.
I love that. But mate, we'll have to convert you from Parramatta, I think, to the Gold Coast Titans, because we're on the up.
Oh dear. Gold Coast
David
Titans.
Mate, he's coming.
But yeah, he's coming. Coming. Look, we can get into it. You know, if we catch up for a beer, I can tell you why it's the dumbest move that the Titans have ever made. But you know what? Good luck to you guys.
Worse than Jared Hayne.
Worse than Jared Hayne. Good luck to you guys. Seriously, I hope you guys get a couple more wins on the board. I've made a bit of money betting on you guys. You know, you're paying ridiculous odds. It's fantastic. It's good to see the people of the Gold Coast finally get an NRL team. Not that they really deserve one, but it's good to see them get one anyway. They haven't really turned up to many games. So I think there might be an average crowd attendance of about 13, maybe 4. I think there's more players on the opposition bench than there are in the stands at the Gold Coast Titans.
I go to every game, so I'm one of the 13.
You go to every game. Okay, well, there you go. If anyone wants to find Barclay, if any of these Antifa guys want to find Barclay, you can go find him at the Titans games. All right, thank you, Barclay. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. Chat to you later.
No worries.